I buried my best friend alive on a Tuesday, and the worst part wasn't the sound of dirt hitting the coffin lid. It was realizing I felt nothing at all. 3 weeks have passed since that night in the woods, and I'm sitting in what used to be our living room. Jessica's coffee mug still sits on the kitchen counter, a ring of dried espresso, staining the ceramic like a small brown bruise. I haven't touched it. I haven't touched anything that belonged to her or him or us. The silence here is different now. It's not the comfortable quiet of a home where people love each other. It's the hollow echo of a place where secrets lived and breathed and multiplied in the dark corners until they grew so large they swallowed everything else. People keep asking me where my wife is, where Marcus went. The police came by twice last week, their questions wrapped in the kind of gentle concern that makes your skin crawl. I tell them what everyone already knows. Jessica had been distant lately, stressed about work. Marcus mentioned needing some time away, maybe a road trip to clear his head. I'm very good at telling people what they already know. But what they don't know, what they can't know, is how betrayal changes you from the inside out. How it rewrites your DNA, turns your blood cold, transforms your heart into something that beats but doesn't feel. They don't know that loyalty, real loyalty, when broken, becomes something else entirely. Something patient, something methodical, something that can wait 20 years to collect what it's owed. I learned that night in the forest that there are worse things than death. There are worse things than being buried alive. The worst thing is living with the knowledge that the people you loved most in the world saw you as nothing more than an obstacle to their happiness. The worst thing is realizing they were probably right. The floorboards upstairs creak sometimes, even though no one's walked on them in weeks. The refrigerator hums Jessica's old rhythm. She always tapped her fingers against it while thinking. And sometimes late at night, I swear I can hear Marcus laughing from somewhere deep underground. But that's impossible, of course. Isn't it? 3 months before the incident, I used to believe that love was built on small moments. The way Jessica hummed while making coffee in the morning. How she'd steal my socks because hers were all in the laundry. The sound of her laugh when Marcus would tell his ridiculous college stories at our dinner table every Sunday night. Marcus had been coming to Sunday dinners for 15 years. 15 years of him sprawled across our couch like he owned it, helping himself to our wine, our food, our conversations. He had his own key, had it since we moved into this house. "What's mine is yours, brother," I'd told him back then, pressing the spare key into his palm after the housewarming party. I should have noticed when Jessica started wearing perfume to those dinners. It was subtle at first, a floral scent that wasn't her usual vanilla. She'd always been practical about such things, saving the expensive stuff for special occasions. But suddenly, Sunday nights with Marcus had become special enough for Chanel. I should have noticed how she'd disappear into the kitchen for longer than necessary, how Marcus would follow her to help with dishes that didn't need washing, how they'd return laughing about some private joke, their cheeks flushed like they'd been running. But I was busy being grateful. Grateful that my wife got along with my best friend. Grateful that the two most important people in my life enjoyed each other's company. Grateful that our little family felt complete. Marcus was everything I wasn't: charismatic, where I was reserved, spontaneous, where I was methodical, confident, where I was cautious. In college, he'd been the one who talked our way into parties, who charmed professors into deadline extensions, who somehow made life feel like an adventure rather than an obligation. "You balance each other out," Jessica used to say, watching us argue over football games or debate politics. "He brings out your fun side and you keep him grounded." She was right in a way. Marcus did bring something out in me, a version of myself that laughed easier, took risks, trusted without calculating the odds. And I kept him grounded, helped him through his string of failed relationships, his career setbacks, his tendency to burn bridges with his impulsiveness. We were brothers in every way that mattered. Blood couldn't have made us closer. That's what made it so perfect for him, I suppose. The trust was absolute. My defenses were down. Jessica's were down. We'd built our lives around the assumption that Marcus would never hurt us, never take advantage, never see our love as something to exploit. I remember the exact moment I first suspected. It was a Thursday evening in September. I came home from work to find them both in the kitchen, Jessica teaching Marcus how to make her grandmother's pasta sauce. Nothing unusual there. Marcus was hopeless in the kitchen, always asking for cooking tips. But Jessica was standing behind him, her hands guiding his as he stirred her chin, nearly resting on his shoulder. And when I walked in, they jumped apart like teenagers caught by their parents. "Ethan!" Jessica's voice pitched higher than normal. "You're home early." "Flight got delayed," Marcus added quickly, though I hadn't asked. "So I figured I'd learn to make something besides cereal for dinner." They laughed too loud too long, and in that moment something cold settled into my chest. Not jealousy exactly, not anger. Just a quiet certainty that something fundamental had shifted in the geometry of our lives. That night, Jessica's phone buzzed against the nightstand at 2:17 a.m. The screen lit up with a text from M. "Thinking about tonight. Can't wait for Sunday." I lay there in the darkness, watching my wife's sleeping face, and felt the first hairline crack form in the foundation of everything I'd built my life on. She looked so peaceful, so innocent, so completely unaware that I was already beginning to plan. 2 months before the incident, the Denver conference was supposed to run through Friday, but the keynote speaker canceled, and they wrapped everything up by Wednesday afternoon. I could have stayed the extra 2 days, explored the city, maybe visited that brewery Marcus was always talking about. Instead, I caught the first flight home, excited to surprise Jessica with an early return and maybe take her out for dinner. I should have called first. The house felt different the moment I stepped inside. There was an energy to it, a warmth that came from bodies moving through space, voices filling rooms. Jessica was home early from work. Her heels were by the front door, kicked off carelessly in a way that suggested she'd been in a hurry to get comfortable. I heard the laughter before I saw anything else. It drifted down from our bedroom, Jessica's laugh bright and musical, followed by Marcus's deeper chuckle. Nothing unusual there. Marcus dropped by all the time when I was traveling, keeping Jessica company, making sure she didn't get lonely in the big house. But something about the quality of that laughter made me pause at the bottom of the stairs. It was intimate, unguarded. The kind of laughter that happens when people forget the world exists beyond the four walls around them. I climbed the stairs quietly, my travel bag still in my hand, some instinct telling me to move carefully. The bedroom door was cracked open just enough to let sound escape, but not enough to see inside clearly. "Can't keep doing this?" Jessica's voice breathless and conflicted. "Why not?" Marcus's voice was closer to her than it should have been. "He's never going to know." "It's not about that. It's about what about him?" The silence that followed was worse than any words they could have spoken. In that silence, I heard fabric rustling, heard the soft sound Jessica made when she was being kissed, a sound I'd heard 1,000 times, but never from outside our bedroom door. I stood there for what felt like hours, but was probably only seconds, my hand frozen on the banister, my world, reorganizing itself around this new, impossible reality. 20 years of friendship, 15 years of marriage, all of it crumbling in the space between one heartbeat and the next. When I finally pushed the door open, they were dressed mostly, but the air still held the charged aftermath of interrupted intimacy. Jessica sat on the edge of our bed, Marcus in the chair by the window, both of them looking like children caught with their hands in the cookie jar. "Ethan," Jessica's face went white. "You're supposed to be in Denver until Friday, I know." My voice sounded strange to my own ears, too calm, too controlled. Conference ended early. Marcus had the decency to look uncomfortable, but not embarrassed, not ashamed, just inconvenienced, like I'd walked in on him using my bathroom without permission, not destroying my marriage. "Look, man," he said, standing up with that easy confidence that had always made me admire him. "This isn't what you think. It's not—" I set my bag down carefully, watching them both. "Because what I think is that my wife and my best friend have been having an affair. What I think is that you've been coming to my house, eating my food, sleeping in my bed when I'm not here. What I think is that you've been lying to me for months." The silence stretched between us like a taut wire. Jessica started crying quiet tears that slipped down her cheeks without sound. Marcus ran a hand through his hair, that gesture he'd made since college, when he was trying to figure out how to talk his way out of trouble. "How long?" I asked. "Ethan, please," Jessica started. "How long?" "Since July," Marcus answered, and I had to admire his honesty even as it gutted me. 4 months. 4 months of Sunday dinners where they'd sat across from each other sharing secret glances while I carved the roast. 4 months of Marcus clapping me on the shoulder, calling me brother while he planned when next he'd have my wife. Why? The question came out smaller than I intended. Marcus shrugged. Actually shrugged like he was explaining why he'd chosen one restaurant over another. "Because I could." Those 3 words hung in the air like smoke. Because I could. Not because he loved her, not because she made him happy, not even because he couldn't resist temptation. Because he could. Because I trusted him enough to give him the opportunity, and he was the kind of man who took what was offered. I looked at Jessica, then really looked at her, seeing her clearly for maybe the first time in years. Her tears weren't for me, I realized. They were for herself, for getting caught, for the inconvenience of having to explain. "I see," I said quietly. And for the first time since I'd known him, Marcus looked uncertain. "What are you going to do?" I picked up my bag and walked toward the door. "Right now I'm going to unpack. Then I'm going to make dinner. Jessica, you should probably call work and tell them you won't be in tomorrow. We have things to discuss." "And me?" Marcus asked. I turned back to look at him, my best friend, my brother. The man who'd just casually destroyed everything I'd built my life around. "You should go home," I said. "I'll call you when I've decided what happens next." He left. Jessica stayed. And I went downstairs to cook dinner with steady hands, my mind already beginning to turn over possibilities, calculating angles, planning moves on a chessboard. Marcus didn't even know we were playing. Because the thing about being methodical, about being careful and observant and patient, is that it makes you very, very good at playing the long game. And I had just decided to play. 6 weeks before the incident. The strangest thing about discovering your life is a lie is how normal everything looks afterward. The coffee maker still gurgles at 6 a.m. The newspaper still lands on the same spot on the driveway. The morning light still filters through the kitchen window in that golden way that used to make me feel grateful to be alive. But gratitude, I learned, is a luxury you can only afford when you believe the world is fundamentally fair. Jessica tried to leave twice in those first weeks. Both times I convinced her to stay. Not through tears or pleading, I'd moved beyond those primitive responses. I convinced her through logic, through practical considerations about lawyers and property division and social embarrassment. I convinced her by being reasonable. "We can work through this," I told her over breakfast, passing her the cream for her coffee like I had every morning for 15 years. "People make mistakes. Marriage is about forgiveness." But she wanted to believe me. I could see the relief in her eyes, the desperate hope that we could somehow return to the comfortable fiction we'd been living. She didn't understand yet that forgiveness and forgetting are very different things, and I was only capable of one. Marcus predictably disappeared for a few days after our confrontation. But he came back. They always do, men like Marcus. He couldn't resist the pull of drama, the intoxicating belief that he was the protagonist in some grand romantic story where love conquers all and consequences are for other people. I let him back into our lives gradually. A casual text about meeting for coffee, a suggestion that we shouldn't let Jessica's confusion destroy 20 years of friendship. I played the part of the understanding husband, the loyal friend who valued relationships over pride. "You're handling this better than I expected," Marcus said over beers at O'Malley's, our old college hangout. 3 weeks had passed since I'd caught them together. "I thought you'd want to kill me." "I thought about it," I admitted, watching him carefully over the rim of my glass. "But what would be the point?" "You can't kill stupidity, and that's all this was, right? A stupid mistake." He nodded eagerly, grateful for the absolution I was offering. "Exactly, just a stupid, meaningless mistake. It doesn't have to change anything between us." But everything had already changed. I was no longer the trusting friend who shared his secrets with Marcus over Sunday dinners. I was something else now, something patient and calculating and utterly focused on a goal Marcus couldn't even imagine. I started keeping notes, not dramatic, obvious surveillance, just small observations recorded in a notebook I kept in my desk drawer. Times when Jessica's phone would buzz and she'd quickly flip it face down. Occasions when Marcus would mention being somewhere he wasn't supposed to be, then catch himself and change the subject. They thought they were being careful, but careful is relative. They were careful compared to reckless teenagers. They weren't careful compared to someone who had devoted his full attention to watching them. Jessica started working late more often. Marcus developed a sudden interest in visiting art galleries and wine tastings, cultural pursuits he'd never shown the slightest interest in before. They had created an elaborate mythology around their affair, complete with romantic venues and meaningful locations that had nothing to do with the suburban reality of their actual relationship. The Riverside Hotel on 5th Street, room 237, every Tuesday and Thursday when I worked late. They'd been meeting there for 2 months before I caught them at home. The desk clerk, a chatty elderly woman named Helen, was happy to confirm their regular reservation when I stopped by with flowers, pretending to plan a surprise for my friends, Marcus and Jessica. "Oh, they're such a lovely couple," Helen gushed. "So in love. He always brings her those white roses she likes." White roses. Jessica's favorite. The same flowers I'd brought her every anniversary for 15 years, now repurposed as props in Marcus's seduction performance. That night I found the credit card statements Marcus thought he'd hidden so carefully. The hotel charges, yes, but also restaurants. I'd never heard of jewelry purchases from stores. Jessica claimed to have never visited weekend trips to wine country that happened to coincide with my business travel. They had built an entire relationship on the foundation of my absence, scheduled their romance around the gaps in my schedule, like parasites feeding on the spaces between my ribs. But the breaking point came on a Thursday evening in October. I was upstairs in my study when my phone rang. Marcus, drunk and sentimental, calling from some bar downtown. "Ethan, brother." His voice slurred with whiskey and false emotion. "I need to tell you something. About Jessica. About us." For a moment, I thought he was going to confess, maybe even apologize. Some small part of me that still remembered friendship hoped he might salvage something from the wreckage of our relationship. Instead, I heard him laugh, not the warm laugh I'd known for 20 years, but something cruel and contemptuous. "She thinks you don't know," he said, and I realized he wasn't talking to me anymore. Someone else was with him. Pathetic Ethan going about his little routine while his wife and best friend are... The line went dead. He'd probably realized he'd pocket-dialed me, or maybe whoever was with him had warned him to hang up. It didn't matter. I'd heard enough. Pathetic Ethan. I sat there in my study, surrounded by the books and awards and photographs that documented my careful, methodical life, and felt something fundamental shift inside my chest. Not anger was too hot, too immediate for what I was becoming. This was something colder, more patient. Something that could wait. I opened my laptop and began researching cabin rentals in remote locations. Places where cell phone service was spotty, where neighbors were few and far between, where 3 friends might go to celebrate a birthday without anyone thinking to look for them until it was far too late. Marcus wanted to play games with my life. He wanted to treat my marriage like his personal entertainment, my friendship like a joke to share with strangers in bars. Then we would play, but we'd play by my rules now. Present timeline. The night of the incident, Marcus's birthday fell on a Tuesday this year, which seemed fitting somehow. Tuesdays had always been his day with Jessica at the Riverside Hotel. It felt poetic to reclaim that day, to transform it from their secret pleasure into something else entirely. A birthday getaway. I'd suggested 3 weeks earlier, my voice carrying just the right note of enthusiasm. Remember that cabin we talked about renting for your 40th? Up in Timber Ridge, I found the perfect place. Marcus had hesitated, a flicker of suspicion crossing his face before the old confidence reasserted itself. Just the 3 of us. Like old times, I said, clapping him on the shoulder with genuine warmth. Because it would be like old times in a way. The 3 of us isolated together with all pretenses finally stripped away. Jessica was easier to convince. She wanted normalcy. Wanted to believe we could return to the comfortable triangle of our previous life. She helped me pack the cooler, chose the wine, even suggested we bring the Polaroid camera for fun photos like we used to take. The irony was almost too perfect. The drive to Timber Ridge took 3 hours through increasingly remote mountain roads. Jessica dozed in the passenger seat while Marcus entertained us from the back with college stories I'd heard 100 times before. He was performing the charming friend, the beloved companion, the man who belonged in our family circle. I let him perform. It would be his last show. The cabin sat at the end of a winding dirt road surrounded by dense pine forest that seemed to swallow sound. No neighbors for miles, no cell towers, no witnesses except the trees and the October moon hanging low over the mountains like a pale, watching eye. "This is perfect," Jessica said, as we carried our bags inside. "So peaceful." Marcus was already exploring, claiming the best bedroom opening cabinets like he owned the place. That casual assumption of ownership, it was the story of our entire friendship, I realized. Marcus took what he wanted because he'd learned that I would always let him. I made us dinner while they settled in steak and potatoes, Marcus's favorite meal since college. I opened the good wine, the bottle I'd been saving for a special occasion. This qualified, I thought. This was definitely special. To friendship, Marcus toasted, raising his glass with theatrical flourish. To the people who stick by you no matter what. To loyalty, I countered, meeting his eyes across the table. Jessica looked between us, sensing undercurrents she couldn't identify. She'd grown more nervous as the evening progressed, hyper-aware of every gesture, every silence. Some primitive instinct was warning her that something was wrong, but she couldn't pinpoint what. After dinner, I suggested we sit by the fire. I poured more wine, encouraged them to relax to enjoy the isolation. Marcus sprawled across the couch with his characteristic confidence. Jessica curled into the armchair, and I sat quietly in the corner, watching them both. "You know what's funny?" I said eventually, my voice casual over the crackling logs. "I found something interesting when I was going through old photos to bring on this trip." I pulled out my phone, scrolled to a particular image, and held it up for them to see. Jessica's wine glass slipped from her fingers, shattering against the stone hearth. Marcus went very still. The photo showed them leaving the Riverside Hotel 3 weeks ago, Jessica laughing at something Marcus had whispered in her ear, his hand possessive on her lower back. I'd taken it from across the street with a telephoto lens patient as any predator waiting for the perfect moment. "Isn't that strange?" I continued conversationally. "Jessica told me she was at a work conference that day, and Marcus, you said you were visiting your mother in Portland. Was summer—" The silence stretched between us like a held breath. Jessica started to cry, not the pretty tears of earlier apologies, but ugly, desperate sobs that shook her entire body. "Ethan," Marcus said carefully, "we should talk about this." "Oh, we will," I assured him, standing up slowly. "But first, I think we could all use some fresh air. There's something beautiful I want to show you both in the woods behind the cabin. A little clearing where the moonlight comes through the trees just perfectly." I moved toward the door, and they followed not because they wanted to, but because the alternative was staying alone with the weight of their exposed lies. "Bring the camera, Jessica," I called over my shoulder. "Like you said, we should take some fun photos like we used to." The October air bit sharp against our faces as we walked into the forest. Our footsteps crunched on fallen leaves, the only sound in the vast mountain silence. I led them deeper into the woods, following a path I'd scouted weeks earlier until we reached the clearing I'd prepared. Candles flickered on a blanket spread between the trees. A bottle of wine waited alongside old photographs, pictures of the three of us from college, from vacations, from Sunday dinners, when everything was still innocent. "What is this?" Jessica whispered. "A memorial," I said simply. "For the friendship that died 4 months ago. For the marriage that ended when you chose him over me. For the trust that's buried so deep now, we'll never dig it back up." That's when they saw the Polaroid pinned to the oak tree behind the blanket, a photo of them in bed, taken from inside my bedroom closet, the week I pretended to be at a conference in Chicago. Jessica screamed, and Marcus finally understood that the game had changed completely. "Hello, friends," I said, stepping back into the shadows where they couldn't quite see me clearly. "Let's talk about what loyalty really means." The forest clearing. Present timeline continues. Marcus tried to run first, that animal instinct kicking in when prey finally recognizes the predator. But I'd chosen this location carefully. The clearing sat in a natural depression, surrounded by thick underbrush and fallen logs that would trip anyone foolish enough to flee in the dark. He made it maybe 20 yards before stumbling over the deadfall I'd strategically placed weeks earlier. When he scrambled back to his feet, I was already there waiting with the kind of patience that only comes from months of careful planning. "Sit down, Marcus," I said quietly, and something in my voice made him obey immediately. Jessica hadn't moved from the blanket. She sat frozen among the flickering candles and scattered photographs, her face pale in the moonlight, tears streaming silently down her cheeks. She kept staring at that Polaroid pinned to the tree, evidence of violation so intimate it broke something fundamental in her understanding of privacy, of safety of home. "You took pictures," she whispered, "in our bedroom while you were destroying everything I'd built my life around?" "Yes." I pulled out a small device from my jacket pocket, a digital recorder. "But pictures aren't the only souvenirs I collected." I pressed play. Their voices filled the clearing, tinny but unmistakable through the speaker. "Does he suspect anything?" "Ethan, God, no. He's so trusting it's almost pathetic." "What if he finds out?" "He won't. And even if he did, what's he going to do? File for divorce? He doesn't have the spine for a real fight." Marcus's recorded laughter echoed through the trees, cruel and dismissive. Jessica covered her face with her hands, but I could see recognition in her posture. The memory of that conversation, the casual cruelty they'd shared at my expense. 23 hours of recordings, I said conversationally. Hotel room conversations, phone calls, text message threads I recovered from your deleted files. Did you know that deleted doesn't actually mean deleted? Not if you know what you're looking for. I walked over to a large canvas bag I'd hidden behind one of the trees earlier that day, unzipping it slowly. The sound seemed unnaturally loud in the forest silence. "Marcus, you're going to help me with a little project." I pulled out a collapsible shovel, letting the metal catch the moonlight. "There's a spot about 50 yards north of here where the soil is particularly soft. Sandy loam, good drainage, perfect for digging." "Ethan, man, let's talk about this," Marcus started, but I held up my hand. "We're past talking. We talked for months while you were planning ways to betray me. We talked over Sunday dinners while you were scheduling hotel visits with my wife. We talked at O'Malley's while you laughed about pathetic Ethan to strangers." My voice stayed level conversational. "I'm tired of talking." I reached back into the bag and withdrew something that made Jessica gasp, a length of chain with a padlock, the kind used to secure bicycles. Simple, effective, completely legal to purchase. "Jessica, you're going to have a choice to make tonight," I continued. "But first we need to take care of some groundwork." The next hour unfolded with the methodical precision I'd been planning for weeks. Marcus dug while I supervised the chain securing Jessica to a sturdy oak tree, not tight enough to hurt, but secure enough to eliminate any thoughts of escape or interference. "This is insane!" Marcus panted, sweat beading on his forehead despite the October chill. "You can't seriously think that I'd actually go through with this." I sat on a fallen log, perfectly relaxed. "You know what's funny, Marcus? You never really knew me at all. You saw what you wanted to see, the accommodating friend, the trusting husband, the man who would always forgive and forget. But that man died the moment I heard you laughing about me in some bar." The hole grew deeper. Marcus's confidence eroded with each shovelful of dirt, replaced by growing panic as he began to understand that this wasn't some elaborate bluff or psychological game. This was real. When the hole was deep enough, roughly 6 feet long, 4 feet wide, 3 feet deep, I had him climb out and sit on the edge legs, dangling into the excavation, like a child on a playground swing. "Here's what's going to happen," I explained, pulling out my phone to start a voice recording. "Marcus, you're going to tell Jessica everything. Every lie you told me, every plan you made together, every time you laughed at my expense, all of it. And if I don't," I gestured toward the hole, "then you find out how comfortable that space really is." What followed was a confession that lasted 27 minutes. Marcus, faced with the reality of consequences, for the first time in his adult life, spilled everything. The affair had started as a game, a challenge, to see if he could seduce his best friend's wife. Jessica's loneliness and need for attention had made her an easy target. They'd mocked my trusting nature, planned elaborate lies around my travel schedule, even fantasized about running away together once they grew bored of the secrecy. "I never loved her," Marcus said, his voice breaking as survival instinct overcame pride. It was just fun. A way to feel powerful. She means nothing to me, Ethan. Nothing?" Jessica's sobs had stopped sometime during the confession. She stared at Marcus with something approaching hatred, finally seeing him clearly not as a romantic hero, but as a predator who had used her vulnerability against both of us. When the recording ended, I stood up and brushed dirt from my hands. "Thank you for your honesty," I said. "Now comes the interesting part." I walked over to Jessica and unlocked the chain. She rubbed her wrists, confused by the sudden freedom. "You have a choice," I told her. "You can take the car keys and drive back to town. Report me to police file for divorce. Start over with whoever will have you after this story gets out. Or I gestured toward the shovel lying beside the hole. "You can try to dig him out." "What?" Her voice was barely a whisper. "The shovel's dull. The ground gets harder the deeper you go. It would take hours to dig deep enough to matter, and you'd have to do it in the dark alone while I'm long gone." I pulled the car keys from my pocket and held them out to her. "But maybe you love him enough to try. Maybe betraying me was worth this." She looked at the keys, then at Marcus, sitting terrified on the edge of his grave, then back at me. "Choose," I said simply. What happened next would haunt her forever, I knew. Not because of what I did, but because of what she chose to do. Because when faced with saving the man she'd destroyed her marriage for or saving herself, Jessica Cole grabbed those keys and ran into the darkness without looking back. And Marcus finally understood what real betrayal felt like. 5 days later, Jessica was found on Highway 9 at dawn, barefoot, and incoherent babbling to the state trooper about being watched from the trees. Her feet were cut and bleeding from running through the forest in darkness. Her hands were raw from clawing at hard earth with her fingernails, evidence that she'd tried at least briefly to dig. But not for long. The search teams found the clearing easily enough. The candles had burned down to puddles of wax. The photographs were scattered by wind, but still recognizable images of happier times when trust wasn't a weapon and love wasn't a game. The hole was there exactly as I'd left it, but empty. No body, no blood, no evidence of violence. Just a shallow grave and Jessica's testimony, which varied wildly depending on who was asking and how many sedatives they'd given her. Sometimes Marcus was buried alive with an oxygen tube. Sometimes he'd escaped and was hunting her through the woods. Sometimes I'd killed him outright and burned the body while she watched. The investigators couldn't make sense of it. Jessica's mental state deteriorated. With each interview, her story fracturing into contradictory fragments that made her sound delusional rather than credible. My disappearance complicated things further. I'd vanished as completely as if the earth had swallowed me. No credit card usage, no cell phone pings, no trace of my car or my movements after that Tuesday night. The cabin had been rented under a false name paid for in cash, leaving no paper trail back to me. Marcus's fate remained a mystery. His car was still at the cabin keys in the ignition wallet on the dashboard. But Marcus himself had simply vanished. The voicemail I'd scheduled helped cement the narrative. It arrived on both their phones exactly 2 weeks after that night in the forest. My voice calm and measured. "You buried us the moment you betrayed me. I just returned the favor. Some graves are deeper than 6 feet. Some are carved into the soul. Ask Jessica if she can still sleep at night. Ask yourself why you're listening to this message if you're supposed to be dead. Maybe the real question isn't where Marcus is. Maybe it's whether Marcus was ever real at all, or just another lie you told yourselves to justify what you'd become." That message broke something fundamental in Jessica's already fractured psyche. She was committed for psychiatric evaluation within hours of receiving it, convinced that I was still out there somewhere, still watching, still planning the next move in a game only I understood. The case remained open, but cold. Without evidence, without witnesses, without even certainty that a crime had been committed. The investigation stalled and eventually faded into the background of more pressing matters. I learned all this from newspaper articles and police reports, safe in my new life 3 states away, living under a name Marcus had never heard and Jessica could never guess. But late at night, when the isolation presses close and the mountain wind sounds like whispered confessions, I sometimes wonder if I buried more than just Marcus's body in that forest clearing. I sometimes wonder if I buried my own soul right alongside his. Present day. 3 weeks after the incident. So here I sit in what used to be our living room, surrounded by the ghosts of a life I methodically destroyed. The coffee ring on Jessica's mug has dried to a perfect brown circle, a stain that will outlast the marriage, the friendship, and probably me. I've become someone I don't recognize. The man who used to worry about hurting people's feelings when declining dinner invitations has been replaced by someone capable of psychological warfare so precise it destroyed 3 lives without technically breaking a single law. The reports say Jessica has been moved to a long-term care facility upstate. She speaks in fragments, now conversations with people who aren't there, apologies to shadows that might be Marcus, or might be me, or might be the woman she used to be before betrayal taught her the true weight of choices. She asks the nurses sometimes if they can hear digging sounds coming from the walls. They increase her medication and speak in the gentle tones reserved for the permanently broken. I should feel satisfied. The plan worked exactly as I'd designed it. Marcus and Jessica destroyed, not by my hand but by their own natures, their own choices, their own capacity for selfishness when survival was on the line. They betrayed each other, just as completely as they'd betrayed me, proving that loyalty was never really part of their vocabulary. But satisfaction, I've learned, is different from peace. Because late at night, when the house settles and the floorboards creak with memories, I hear things too. Footsteps in the hall where no one walks. Laughter from the kitchen where no one cooks. The sound of a shovel biting into earth, rhythmic and patient, coming from somewhere deep beneath the foundation. Sometimes I find myself checking the locks twice, 3 times. Sometimes I catch myself looking over my shoulder when I walk to the mailbox. Sometimes I wake up convinced that someone is standing at the foot of my bed watching me, with eyes that reflect moonlight like coins on a corpse. The rational part of my mind knows it's guilt manifesting as paranoia. The methodical part that planned everything so carefully understands that trauma creates its own hauntings, that the mind punishes itself for crossing lines that can never be uncrossed. But there's another part, a part that's been growing stronger since that night in the forest, that wonders if Marcus really is gone, or if he's simply waiting in whatever dark place I sent him, planning his own patient revenge. After all, I taught him well. I showed him exactly how betrayal works, how to wait, how to let someone destroy themselves through their own choices. What if he was a better student than I realized? What if the game isn't over? Yesterday I found something that made my blood turn to ice water. A single white rose on my doorstep, Jessica's favorite flower, the ones Marcus used to bring her at the hotel. No note, no explanation. Just that perfect bloom lying across the threshold like an offering or a threat. It could be a coincidence. Roses grow wild, sometimes fall from delivery trucks, get dropped by passing strangers. The rational explanations are endless and completely plausible. But methodical minds don't believe in coincidences. I've started making my own plans now. New identity documents, cash reserves, escape routes mapped and memorized. Because if Marcus survived that night, if he clawed his way out of whatever grave I prepared for him, then he's had weeks to plan his response. And unlike me, he has nothing left to lose. The house settles around me as I write this full of shadows that might be memories or might be promises. Somewhere in the distance, I hear what could be wind through the trees, or could be someone digging patient and methodical, working their way closer to the surface. I built my revenge on the principle that people will always choose themselves over others when push comes to shove. Jessica proved me right when she took those keys and ran. But now I'm about to test that principle on myself, because there are footsteps on my front porch, and they sound exactly like Marcus's walk, confident, casual, like he owns whatever space he occupies. I guess we're about to find out if the dead really stay buried, or if some betrayals echo long enough to claw their way back from whatever hell we make for them. The doorknob is turning. Game over, Or maybe game on. Sometimes the only way to bury betrayal is to bury yourself with it. But some graves aren't deep enough to hold the truth forever.